Welcome to Genesis Unleashed, the show where we unleash the truth of Genesis.
And pose 15 questions evolutionists have a hard time explaining. Our topic today is CMI's Question Evolution campaign. It's started a little while ago and really centers around 15 questions that were put together in a tract.
It's this tract,
It's
yes.
this tract that poses 15 questions that evolutionists have an extremely hard time to answer. How would you say? Correctly or at all?
It's problems with the theory of evolution summarized in 15 questions in this Question Evolution flyer. And you can hand this out to people at school, your friends and relatives who are convinced that there's a lot of scientific support behind evolution. This flyer, in a very, very short summary sort of way,
kind of exposes, because many people think that there's just rock solid, evolution is just rock solid, we've got it all figured out, and it kind of really exposes that there are many, many problems and flaws. And so of course, this has elicited a kind of a reaction from many atheist groups around the world.
Yes.
People have been emailing in and making comments and so on blogs. And so what happened, of course, we posed these 15 questions, and evolutionists have come back, and of course they're trying to defend their belief system.
Sure.
And come back with some rebuttals, of course, and then we have also rebutted their rebuttals, right?
Yes. Looked at they've attempted to answer those 15 questions,
right.
And then we've come up with a rebuttal to those supposed answers. And we're going to do a number of programs here on Genesis Unleashed, going through each one of those 15 questions for evolution.
We're going to go through every one and explain them so people can tune in and they can look at that. But what we wanted to do here was there were some general objections just to the whole concept, just to the campaign itself, or just to the fact that we posed these 15 questions. And so that's what we're going to deal with here, and then we'll deal with the specifics in later shows.
Right. One of those objections was the first one that we have here. And you can look at all of this at creation.com, of course. You go there and you can download even PDF flyers, print out your own if you want, although you can get them from any CMI office at great bulk rates to hand them out. Yep. Here's one of the objections. These questions are only unanswerable because our science isn't advanced enough.
Okay, point number one, they're unanswerable. The skeptic has admitted these are unanswerable. So that's point number one I want to make.
Yeah, and the rebuttals. We'll just kind of summarize these. Maybe read through a bunch of them. The rebuttal starts off with, "But if science has not yet advanced, then how could they possibly know what can be answered in the future?" Generally, non-Christians are opposed to predictive prophecy, especially when it comes to the Bible.
Right.
So how could you predict what's going to be answered in the future? The thing is, there's this notion that, well, once science advances, then we'll have the answers. But that has not been the case. Right. Back in Darwin's time, the thinking was that a cell was probably a fairly simple device, a blob of goo, and there were these sorts of notions. But science has not helped the situation for evolutionists. If anything, the advancements of science show the incredible complexity of living things. And it becomes more and more difficult as science progresses for evolution to continue. So that's not a real good answer to this first question.
Darwin was even using things like saying, well, the reason why the fossil record does not reveal evolution, he said that was the weakest link in his whole theory of evolution was, well, we just haven't done enough study.
Right.
Well, this is 100 plus years later, guess what? It's really not looking good for them now. So yeah, this is kind of the opposite of where this rebuttal should have gone. Objection number two was that CMI uses a misleading definition of evolution. Evolution is only the change in allele frequency in a population over time. Well, the fact is, the word evolution gets used for a lot of different meanings.
And we need to make sure that the terms are well defined.
And we do.
Okay. we do, that's right.
In this Question Evolution campaign, we are using the word evolution defined as the general theory of evolution. not just simply changes in allele frequencies. That's just talking about one aspect of biological evolution.
Which we agree with.
Which we agree with. Creationists agree
We'd
with.
be evolutionists if that was the definition of evolution.
Exactly.
CMI would be an evolutionary organization.
So if you look at the creationary model and the evolutionary model, and they both share that definition, changes in allele frequency, and we both agree with them, obviously this argument is outside of that.
That's not what we're talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
So the evolutionist Gerald Kirkett actually defined the general theory of evolution as the theory that all the living forms in the world have arisen from a single source, which itself came from an inorganic form. There was no life. Then first life came into existence, and then it diversified and became everything. So this is a term, this is a definition that scientists would agree with, evolutionary scientists would agree with. So it's unjustifiable to criticize us for using that very definition.
So when we're referring to evolution, we mean the grand theory, molecules to man, particles to people. That's what we're talking about.
And we made that very clear in all our literature.
Yeah. A third objection. Even if science cannot explain the origin of life, to say that God must have done it is an argument from ignorance.
Again, the evolutionists have admitted we can't explain these things, but then they've...
Even if.
Yes.
The thing is, it's not a God of the gaps kind of thing. We're not arguing from a position of ignorance here.
Right.
For example, take DNA and the information in living things. We're not arguing, we don't know where information comes from, therefore God must have done it.
Yeah.
No, there's plenty of... No, in fact, it's common knowledge to talk about information. When
and
you
where
see
it comes from.
A message in the sand, for example, if you're walking along a beach in the summertime, Johnny loves Susie, you know from common sense, from just experience, that came from someone intelligent.
Right, you wouldn't say, hey, look what the
that?
wind and the tide brought in. That would be an unintelligent analysis of what you're observing, because you know sand, it doesn't contain information.
The waves don't make structures like that in the sand. You recognize the difference between the structures in the sand that the waves will make and information when you see it, which implies intelligence. So when we see the huge amounts of complex coded information in all living things, it's a natural conclusion that there must be some intelligence behind it. We're not arguing from a position of ignorance.
We're arguing from what we do know, not what we don't know. That's an invalid criticism.
Right. However, there's another point. When the evolutionist says, we don't know how this works, we don't know about the origin of life, but evolution did it somehow, now that's an argument from ignorance.
Right.
We don't know, but evolution did it somehow. It's an evolution of the gaps type of it's the God of the gaps we're often accused of. But
that's right.
That's
and
not
it's
the situation
interesting
here.
that their admission in these objections comes right there. We don't know. Just because we don't know how to answer these questions doesn't mean evolution didn't do it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Objection number 4. Many of these questions involve things that are very improbable, but we know that improbable events happen all the time. Now, we've heard this kind of thing before, right? And people say, well, listen, you guys are talking about events that are extremely improbable. You know, what's the chance of XXX happening or whatever? Right. And then they'll use an example like, well, look, someone won the lottery last week. That number that was chosen, it was highly improbable that that number would get chosen. But what you've actually done is changed what you're really asking. You're not asking, will a number come up? Well, the chances of a number coming up in a lottery is 100%. You're going to get a result.
You're going to get a number.
Right?
It's just whether or not your number comes up.
Right.
That's the probability.
Once you assign a certain target, then you get probability arguments.
Right.
Whether the number is going to... There is a number that will appear. That's 100%, so it's not... There's no probability factor there. Once you assign a target, a number, and then you say, what's the chance of that occurring? That's when it gets very specific. And of course, in later shows, actually, question number 1 in the pamphlet here, we're going to actually address that mathematically.
We'll do that in some detail.
That's right, and show how, because there is a point, mathematicians agree, that you can get to a point of probability where theoretically it's possible that this might happen, but nobody would believe it.
Practically, mathematically, there's still a probability there. In practical terms, it's impossible.
Exactly, it becomes.
All right, another objection. CMI uses quote mining, citing scientists as part of their argument against evolution, even though these scientists are evolutionists. CMI quotes scientists out of context. Actually, we're very careful We know that our scientists are under the gun anyways,
Right.
Under the magnifying glass and so on. We need to be very careful. In fact, we have a section on our website called Arguments Creationists Shouldn't Use. We're very careful not to quote out of context. Now, there are, in fact, it's actually good to use an evolutionist. We're not saying that the evolutionist all of a sudden has thrown out evolution theory, but to use an evolutionist and saying, when an evolutionist says, look, here's a difficulty with the theory, it's far better than having a creationist do that. It carries more weight. It's from a hostile witness.
Right, right. And it's only invalid if you're saying, if you are quoting them out of context. I mean, some creationists have quoted, for example, Darwin out of context. They've said,
yes,
but,
about the eye, the absurdity of the eye, and so on. Darwin said that it's absurd to think that the eye, with all its amazing complexities, could evolve slowly over time via my theory.
And if you stop right there, you're quoting him out of context, because right after that he says, but he thinks it could have happened.
He thinks it could easily happen step by step.
Right. So that would be invalid to quote him like that.
Right. To suggest that Darwin is actually Darwin is saying that, well, no, this can't really happen.
Right.
Because that's not what he's saying in the quote.
Yeah. But there are examples that we use of evolutionists themselves who are criticizing, maybe other aspects of evolutionary theory, or admitting there's huge problems and they don't know how it happens.
Yeah, for example, we might use an expert in bird evolution where he's talking about the impossibility of dinosaurs evolving into birds.
Right.
That's not quoting out of context.
And he can still believe in evolution.
Yes.
He still believes in evolution. We're just showing that there's
problems with dinosaur to bird evolution.
That's right.
And here's even an evolutionist saying those particular things.
And of course, we get quoted as well. So it's not invalid to quote the opposing team when you're trying to invalidate their position.
So those are some of the general objections to the question evolution flyer that was put together here. And we'll get into some of the specific, the 15 questions in future programs.